What if I told you that there was a small muscle in your arm that controlled every single part of your upper body? So much so that your wrists and shoulders wouldn't even be able to work together if this muscle didn't exist. And with this scientific fact being the exact reason why you aren't seeing the gains you're supposed to. Because when most people say forearms, they're usually talking about how they look, things like veins, size, and that tight, pumped up feeling after curl. But that way of thinking completely misses what forearms actually do, because they're not just a muscle you flex for social media posts, they're one of the most important parts of your body, and they're also the very first point where your body interacts with external load. According to science, this means that if your forearms are weak, unstable, or poorly trained, everything above it automatically becomes extremely limited no matter how strong the rest of your body is. Your forearms aren't one simple muscle either. They're a dense group of muscles that control your fingers, wrist position, and how force moves through your elbow. You see, these muscles work together to stabilize joints, manage tension, and send safety signals to the nervous system, yet most people train them like how they would train biceps. Everyone is always chasing a pump instead of control, endurance, and stability, which is like trying to drive a powerful car with loose steering and worn out tires. Because even if the engine is strong, the power never reaches the road the way it's supposed to. Every time you grab a barbell, a dumbbell, a pull-up bar, or even a cable handle, your nervous system immediately checks how secure that grip is. Science tells us that grip strength is one of the fastest and clearest safety signals the brain uses during lifting, and if the grip feels weak, unstable, or fatigued, the brain responds by lowering force output throughout the entire chain as a protective reflex to prevent damage and control joints. This means that if your grip is off, your body will literally not let you lift a weight. This limitation happens before you feel muscle fatigue, which is why people often feel weak without feeling sore, and it explains why deadlifts will stall early even when the legs and back feel fresh, why rows die off before the lats ever get closer to failure, and why pull-ups feel harder than they should despite having the muscle mass to perform them, because the body simply doesn't trust the connection point between you and the weight. From a scientific standpoint, grip strength has been shown to increase your neural drive to the muscles above it, meaning stronger forearms allow stronger and clearer signals from the brain to reach the arms, shoulders, and upper back. Compared to weak forearms, the difference is shocking. What will happen is your body limiting how much weight you can pull without your brain signals even reaching the muscle you're training. This is exactly why improving forearm strength often leads to sudden improvements in lifts that don't even directly involve your forearms in the first place. This also explains why straps and assistance tools can be a double-edged sword, because while they allow you to lift heavier loads in the short term, they remove the very signal the nervous system relies on to feel safe, which means the forearms never adapt, the grip never improves, and the same strength ceiling keeps showing up again and again no matter how hard you train the bigger muscle. What all of this means is that forearms are not a secondary muscle group or a finisher at the end of a workout. They're part of a larger control system that determines how much force can safely enter your body, and when that system is ignored, everything else is forced to operate at an entirely different level. But to understand how exactly your forearms control all of your upper body, we need to ask science why this happens in the first place. See, science says that once the weight leaves your hands, the next thing that decides how strong you are is not your biceps, your chest, or your back. It's whether force can actually travel cleanly through your wrists and elbows without leaking out along the way. This right here is where your forearms do all the work. Their main job is to stabilize the joints being used in the workout, ultimately dictating how well you'll perform. The wrist and elbow are not designed to be loose under load, they're designed to be stable while allowing controlled movement, and that stability comes almost entirely from the forearm muscles. These muscles wrap around the bones and act like tension cables that keep everything aligned when force is applied, meaning if those muscles aren't strong or coordinated, the joints become unstable and gets lost before it ever reaches the larger muscles upstream. So when your wrist collapses, bends back, or shifts side to side under load, the body reads sees that as a huge threat, because an unstable wrist changes the angle of force traveling into the elbow and shoulder. This is exactly why pressing with weak forearms often feels shaky, why rolls feel disconnected, and why certain lifts feel strong one day and unstable joints in the chain aren't locked into a position the body trusts. So force leaks out through small movements that you never even notice. But your nervous system absolutely does notice it. Science tells us that strength is not just about producing force, it's about transmitting force. And transition requires stiffness in the right places and mobility in the other right places, which means your forearms have to create just enough tension to stabilize the wrist and elbow without over-restricting movement, allowing power to flow smoothly from your hands into your arms, shoulder, and torso. When forearms are weak or fatigued, the body compensates by trying to use muscles that aren't designed for stability, which increases stress on the elbow and shoulder, reduces efficiency, and makes lifts feel harder than they should. Not because the muscles are tired, but because the system is inefficient and wasting energy trying to protect itself. So you see, your forearms are the checkpoint between your elbows, wrists, and upper body, meaning that without strong forearms, everything above them will never see true gains. What this shows is that forearms don't just help you hold the weight, they determine whether the force you create actually reaches the muscles you're trying to train. And when that system isn't strong enough, strength leaks out at the wrist and elbow, long before it ever has a chance to show up in your chest, back, or arm. So now we know how the brain decides how much strength to use and how your forearms decide how much of that strength it makes through to your upper body. We need to go over something that can be extremely problematic. You see, when you have weak forearms, stalled lifts and lost strength are not the problem you really need to be worried about, because what actually happens as a result of this is immense pain and joints taking stress they were never designed to handle. And this is where a lot of people get confused, because they assume pain just means something is injured, when in reality, it usually means the load is being absorbed by the wrong tissue for way too long. Your forearms are meant to act like shock absorbers and stabilizers for the elbow. Science shows us that when your forearms are strong, they take a large portion of the stress every time you grip, pull, or control weight. But when they're weak or fatigued, that stress gets pushed into the tendons around the elbow instead. This is why elbow pain shows up so often in people who train back, arms, and grip heavy movements without ever building forearm capacity to match the workload. This is also why pain often appears even when your forearm looks fine, because the issue isn't something visible or obvious. Subtle overload, where the muscles that should be sharing the work can't keep up. Both tendons and connective tissues slowly take on more stress every single rep, session after session, until irritation shows up in the form of tightness, aching, or sharp discomfort during pulls and presses. According to science, weak forearms also quietly limit muscle growth everywhere else, because they often fail before the bigger muscles do, which means sets end early not because your lats, biceps, or upper back are tired, but because your grip gives out. And when that happens consistently, the muscles you're trying to grow never receive enough high quality volume to actually adapt. Remember when I said that the forearms are like the checkpoint between your wrists and elbows and your upper body? This isn't just a saying I made up. It's basically a scientific fact. Your forearms will always give out before your strongest muscles, which is exactly why training them is so important. To even further this, science tells us that muscle growth depends on tension, time under load, and repeat exposure, and when forearms fatigue early, all three of those get cut short. So even though you're working hard, the target muscles never stay loaded long enough to send a strong growth signal, which is why people can train back and arms for years and still feel like they're not getting anywhere. The body also responds to unstable joints by increasing muscle tension around them, which means when forearms aren't doing their job, the nervous system tightens everything else to protect the elbow, making movements feel stiff, uncomfortable, and inefficient. And over time, this constant guarding will make lifts feel worse instead of better, even as you gain experience and muscle mass. This itself is a cycle where pain leads to less loading leads to less adaptation, and less adaptation leads to even more stress being placed on the same vulnerable tissues, all because the forearms were never trained to handle the demands being placed on them in the first place. What this shows is that forearm weakness doesn't just slow progress, it actively pushes stress into places you don't want it, limiting growth while increasing pain, which means fixing forearm strength isn't just about lifting more weight, it's about letting your body train hard without without breaking down in the process. Because once you step back and look at how the human body actually produces strength, it becomes clear that forearms were never designed to be a small, secondary muscle group trained at the end of a workout just to chase a pump or visible vein. Forearms are part of a much larger control system that constantly communicates with the nervous system to determine whether it is safe to produce force, maintain joint position, and repeat effort under load without losing coordination or stability. Unlike muscles, whose primary role is to create movement by shortening and lengthening, the forearms are built to manage tension for long periods of time. Whether it's adjusting grip pressure, stabilizing the wrist and elbow, or responding to changes in load in real time, forearms are active in almost every single lift you do. This is also why they respond far better to training methods that emphasize control, endurance, and consistency rather than maximal effort isolation exercises. Science shows us that the forearms are packed with sensory receptors that provide constant feedback to the brain about grip security, joint position, and load intensity, and this information plays a major role in how much force the nervous system allows you to put out. Because when the feedback is clear and reliable, the brain feels confident that the system can handle stress. But when the feedback is weak, inconsistent, or delayed, the brain responds by limiting output and increasing protective tension throughout the arm. The same protective tension that causes you to have similar movements and a ton of pain. This is why improving forearm strength often leads to changes that feel almost automatic, such as smoother pressing mechanics, more stable pulling patterns, improved posture during heavy lifts, and fewer random aches around the elbows and shoulders. Because the body finally has a stable and trustworthy connection point between you and the weight, allowing the rest of the system to organize itself more efficiently. It also explains why training methods like loaded carries, dead hangs, timed holds, and slowly controlled eccentrics tend to produce better long-term results than endless wrist curls, because these movements train the forearms in the exact way they are used during real lifting. The forearms are meant to be trained so they can stabilize and communicate, not to be a flex for Instagram or Snapchat. When forearms are trained this way, strength stops feeling fragile and unpredictable and starts feeling repeatable and controlled, because the nervous system no longer has to constantly protect the joints by limiting force output, and instead allows you to apply strength more consistently across multiple sets, exercises, and training sessions. Over time, this shift reduces unnecessary joint stress, improves tolerance to higher training volumes, and allows the bigger muscles of the arms, shoulders, and back to finally receive the quality stimulus they need to grow, not because you added more exercises or changed your split, but because you removed the cap that was quietly limiting progress. What this ultimately shows is that forearms don't limit the cap that was quietly limiting progress. What this ultimately shows is that forearms don't limit you because they are small or hard to grow. They limit you because they sit at the very front of the strength chain, and if that front link is weak or poorly trained, the entire system has to operate below its potential to stay safe. Once forearms are trained as the control system they actually are, the entire upper body becomes stronger, more coordinated, and more resilient. Lifts feel more connected and less stressful, pain becomes less common instead of more frequent, and progress finally starts to feel logical instead of random, which is exactly what happens when training aligns with how the body is designed to work. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more weightlifting and fitness content so you can get gains the smarter way. So with that being said, I'll see you on the other side.